Hello, this is Mr. Huff, and I want to talk to you about making customized wheels. In the video, it shows a simplified wheel, and it is not very accurate to the kind of things you'll be modeling later this year. So I wanted to show you how to a different way to approach that. So how to do this differently. So here you see I'm starting a sketch on the XY plane. One of the things you'll have to do is to draw a sketch, you need to see inside. So I clicked on View, and I'm looking for slice graphics. With this shorter window I'm using for this recording, you don't see the words next to it, but you can see what I just pressed. So what I need you to consider is, what is the profile of your wheel? So you can see the area I've highlighted. If you imagine a central axis of a wheel you sliced, think about the shape that you see in the upper half from the origin. Okay, so that's the shape we want to sketch. So if we go and actually open up that sketch and look at it, you can see that's the shape that I actually drew in the sketch. Notice also I have a line at the origin, and this gives me something easy to grab whenever I want to revolve that. However, you can also use the axis on the origin panel on the left in the browser. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to do this just real quick without any kinds of actual dimensions. So I'm starting a new sketch, and I'm going to use some construction lines to help outline where my boundaries are. This will help you a lot when you're doing your drawings, rather than doing a bunch of drawings with a bunch of lines that you have to delete and overcome constraints and that sort of thing. If you will kind of outline where it's going to be with some construction lines, that makes your job a lot easier. So that's what I'm doing here. I've identified the central axis, and now I'm going to do some 2-point rectangles. Of course, you would be using measurements that you collected, and you would be looking at the radius from that central axis to find those places where to start the inner ring and the outer ring. So I'm just going to sketch a little drawing here. So here I have a rectangle, and I've got another one here. And I'm just going to throw a couple of little squares on the top of this. Normally I would want to do this where it was a continuous line instead of independent squares, but for the purpose of this video, it's just fine. So I'm trimming this up a little bit, clean it up. Okay, so I've got the basic shape of my profile. The ones you do will have curves and maybe chamfers and some things like that. But for this one, just to have a real quick model, this will be fine. So I'm going to choose Revolve and choose my profiles. And then I'm going to switch to Axis. And I'm going to choose that central axis I defined and do a full rotation. I could also go over here and open up the origin and choose the axis that it lines up, in this case the x-axis, and that would work as well. So that gives you the basic shape of your rim without the spokes and details that go around. So you could do things at this point like add chamfers and add some fillets and that sort of thing, and I just noticed that my pop-up window went off the screen. But I'm using the fillet tool right now to kind of define that little curve spot there. And it's got one on the other side. And I think I do this wrong. Here we go. Let me put that in place so I can flip it around and not do it. So now I have to do it again. Notice how I can choose very carefully from the front side and fill it from the front. As long as you can see the edge, that's all you need. And there I'm doing a chamfer on the inside of that little wheel. And I think that's pretty close to what they actually look like. They have a little chamfer at that edge. So now we've got a wheel that's finalized except for the spokes. So what I did is, I'm changing the color to gold. So what I did is I prepared a rim that has no spokes on it, and we're going to do that a few different ways. This first one, we're going to make a sketch on an internal plane and extrude it outward. So I'm going to be setting a work plane on the back side of this rim, and so now I have my sketch there, and I'm going to start a sketch on that. So I'm actually looking at the wheel from behind. It doesn't really matter as long as we get our shape. Here again, I'm using View Slice Graphics to see inside the wheel. And now I have to do my sketch on the inside of this wheel. I need to make sure that it overlaps that kind of chalky looking area. And you can use some constraints and put different shapes here. I'm just going to do something simple for demonstrations. So I am putting a rectangle with a circle in it. Not that I've ever seen a spoke that looks this way, but for this demonstration that works. I'm zoomed in too close, it keeps grabbing the edges there. And so I'm going to trim out the stuff I don't need so I can get a nice extrusion. So now I have a simple drawing, a simple sketch right there, and let me try to get it where you can see it. So there's my sketch. And now I want to extrude that forward, and I have to reverse it. So I'm playing around with those settings until it comes out of the rim, and I'm going to change that thickness so it's just barely above the outer edges there. So when you look at it now, you can see that it's there kind of just above the surface of the rim. Now we're going to use a 3D tool called the circular pattern. And when you do this, you have to choose the spoke that you just made. That's the feature. You want to be careful not to select the entire rim. It will get confused. And then you tell it how many times you want it to repeat that pattern. And there you have it. Okay. One of the things to watch out is it doesn't like it if those intersect one another. So you may see some complaining, some errors there. But this is my rim. So I did a sketch and extruded it out to this past the surface of the rim. Now we're going to do one where we use an extrusion to define a spoke and kind of modify it a little bit, and then we do a circular pattern with that spoke. So again, I'm setting my work plane, choosing one of the axes or the work planes from origin, and I chose View and Slice Graphics. And this, we want to make sure, again, that kind of grainy area, we want to make sure our drawing is built into the inside of that, so it has a good solid connection. And here I'm just throwing some lines there, and I'm going to do a couple of arcs just to have some different things going on. So an arc from inside, and so I give it a little curve there, and then I'm going to do another one here, and you wouldn't have a point like that, so let's kind of place that inside and put a little curve on it, and then I'm going to add another arc that connects those two to make it kind of smooth there, and then I'm going to trim off that little peaky point. I don't want that point on there. So here we have this little curve shape there. Now if I try to revolve that, it's not going to, because it's not a closed loop. So I'm using straight lines to connect the ends inside the rim that we've already defined. Okay, so now I have a closed loop like this. So now we're going to choose that part and do revolve, but in this case we don't want to go full. We're going to use an angle, and you can play around with different angles. And here again, I'm going to choose the axis to revolve around. I chose the x-axis, and I don't want it 90, I want it like 15 degrees. So the more degrees you give it, the bigger it is, the further around it goes. Alright, so now I'm going to add some chamfers, and I'm going to see with the little white edges there, I'm putting a chamfer on all of those edges, and I want to do that on both sides. So what that does, it kind of shaves a little edge off, and then I click apply. Now one of the things when we do the circular pattern to keep in mind is you have to select that entire piece. So when you're choosing your features, you want to make sure you see revolution, the second revolution, and the chamfers together. Well, otherwise it won't bring the chamfers with it. So I've selected, you can see on the left side, revolution and chamfer, and now I'm going to choose my central axis. Again, it's the x-axis, and it's going to revolve around that. And then we're going to tell it how many times we want to repeat that pattern. So I put in 10, and you can see where it's going to place those pieces, and then I hit OK, and it renders all of those for you. So that's just a real quick example of how to make a spoke and then revolve the spoke around to fill up the space. The last one we're going to do is where we make a plate on the outside of the rim and then punch holes through it. So again, I'm going to start by starting a sketch on the XY plane, choosing View and Slice Graphics, and now we're looking inside the rim. And just like we did before, we'll go to Sketch, and we're going to define some sort of shape. And on this one, I think I just used angular lines. So I'm just drawing a line across. That's going to be the inside. And then just making a bunch of lines here. So the main thing is this shape has to be a closed loop. And it can't be self-intersecting, so be careful of that. So I'm waiting to get that right perpendicular right there. And now I have a closed loop. And now I'm going to look for revolve. Having some difficulty. There it is. Yes. Alright, I'm going to choose that profile. And then I'm going to choose that axis. And again, it's on this one, it's the x-axis. And this time I'm doing a full revolution. And so what I've done is I've made a covering plate that connects the outside edge to the inner cylinder. Now I'm going to do an offset plane from the outer face of the rim to where it just covers that bumpy revolution I just did. And it's hard to see from this side, so if we look at the front, you'll see that it's just barely above that feature. Okay, so I don't want it to be, I want it to be just over that feature. That's what I need it. So I'm making a work plane just above the surface of the rim. Now I'm going to start a sketch on that plane, and I need to be aware of where some edges are. So the main one I need to know about is on the inside of the rim. I want to project the geometry of a circle, that outer circle that's not on the outside, but it's the inner circle that represents that central tube. And there's another one up here, and after I thought about it for a moment, I don't really need that. I just need to know where the underlying circles are. If you cross outside of those, what can happen is you'll cut slits down through that interior piece and it looks weird. So I just want to make sure that when I punch a hole through it, it's not going to go into the rim that I've already defined. There are probably more elegant ways to do this, but let's just run with it like this. Okay, now what I'm trying to do is put two lines, and I had it on construction line, change that, a line from the outside to the center point, and then from the center point back to the outside somewhere. We're going to use the symmetric constraint. Well, actually, I'm going to put a center construction line here that goes along that axis. That central axis is what I'm trying to do. Wouldn't it be nice if it worked? So I've got a line there, and now I'm going to use the symmetric constraint. This line and this line are going to be symmetric around this line. And so it moves the two lines, and now it's nice and even. And now I'm drawing a circle that's going to go just past that. Oh, it's on construction line still. Man. And it's still on construction line, but I didn't notice. And third time's the charm. Turn the construction line off. I still have a circle. Let's make a third circle. Alright, here we go. I have a circle that is just past that projected geometry from earlier. And I want to make sure that as I pull out my second circle, it's inside the rim at the top, so or on the outer edge. Now I'm going to go through and trim off everything that's not part of my little pie shape here. So I need to get rid of these circles and get rid of these lines here. And there's two here. We've got to zoom in and see those, trim those off. And now I've got a little wedge shape that is a fully enclosed loop. Now I'm going to hit extrude and I'm going to tell it cut, and we're going to go into that rim, and you can see it punched a nice little hole right there. Okay, one of the things to dress it up a little bit, I'm going to add a fillet here, and I'm going to add a fillet here, and what that does is kind of curves it a little bit to make it look a little bit dressier. And now we are going to, I'm going to hide that work plane so you can see what we have here because it's kind of in the way. Again, circular pattern, I choose that cutout and the two fillets. Notice on the left side it has the extrusion and the fillet selected. And then we're going to choose a circular feature, and then we're going to tell it how many we want. And there it is. And there we have a lovely little rim defined, and I like how that curved little fillet makes it look really dressy. So that's the third approach you can use to making custom rims. Feel free to do whatever you like.